Even a woman who barely knew you could see you're worthless, my ex-mother-in-law had sneered just hours ago, laughing as the lawyer handed me a single, humiliating $1 bill. Her son had abandoned my 6-year-old daughter and me to drown in crippling leukemia medical debts, and they were absolutely confident this inheritance was the final nail in my coffin. They had no idea that I was currently standing in the dark, climate-controlled cellar of the sprawling Victorian mansion that came with that exact dollar bill, peeling the dust covers off a secret $12 million contemporary art collection. They thought they had destroyed me, but my late great-aunt had just handed me the ultimate masterpiece of revenge. It was barely enough to put gas in her 15-year-old Toyota Corolla, which was currently running on fumes in a prayer. She stood there, clutching the crumpled $20 bills the pawnbroker had handed her, feeling the cold November rain soak through her thin denim jacket, and wondered how a life that had once looked so stable had collapsed so completely. 2 years ago, Sarah had been a nurse at Mercy General Hospital, married to a man she thought loved her, living in a modest but comfortable suburban home. Then Emma got sick. Leukemia. The medical bills came in waves, brutal and relentless, even with insurance. Sarah took a leave of absence to care for her daughter full-time during the worst of the chemotherapy. Her husband, Michael, couldn't handle the pressure. He filed for divorce 6 months into Emma's treatment, citing irreconcilable differences. The judge awarded him minimal child support, since Sarah had no income. Michael's family, the Richardsons, were old money from Connecticut, the kind of people who summered in the Hamptons and had lawyers on permanent retainer. They made sure Sarah got absolutely nothing in the settlement except debt. Emma was in remission now, thank God, but Sarah was drowning. She had 1 on 27 zosanded in medical debt, no health insurance, and she was 3 months behind on rent for the cramped 1-bedroom apartment they shared. Her nursing license had lapsed because she couldn't afford the continuing education credits required for renewal. She survived on food stamps, occasional shifts at a 24-hour diner, and the charity of her church. When the certified letter arrived from the law offices of Callaway and Finch, informing her that her great-aunt Evelyn Witmore had passed away and named her in the will. Sarah felt a flicker of hope for the first time in months. She remembered Aunt Evelyn vaguely, an eccentric old woman who lived somewhere in upstate New York and sent birthday cards with $5 bills tucked inside. When Sarah was a child, maybe, just maybe, Evelyn had left her something that could help. The reading of the will took place in a sterile conference room that smelled of lemon furniture polish and expensive coffee. Sarah sat alone on one side of the long mahogany table, wearing her only pair of dress pants and a blouse she had ironed 3 times to hide the worn fabric. On the other side of the table sat Michael's mother, Judith Richardson, draped in a black Channel suit and reeking of dire perfume, flanked by Michael and his new fiancée, a blonde attorney named Vanessa. Apparently, Aunt Evelyn had been Judith's aunt by marriage, and the Richardsons were convinced they were entitled to the estate. Attorney Gerald Callaway, a silver-haired man in his late 60s with kind eyes, sat at the head of the table, holding a thick leather folder. Callaway cleared his throat and began to read. To my niece by marriage, Judith Richardson, I leave my collection of vintage costume jewelry and my library of first edition poetry books. Judith exhaled sharply, her mouth pinching into a tight line. Costume jewelry. She looked personally offended to Michael Richardson. Calloway continued, "I leave my 1987 Bixaden currently in storage." Michael smirked, clearly unimpressed. And finally to Sarah Mitchell, "I leave the sum of $1 to be paid in cash." Immediately following this reading, the room went completely silent for 3 seconds. Then Judith let out a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed off the glass walls. $1, Judith sneered, turning to look directly at Sarah. "Well, that's fitting, isn't it? Even a woman who barely knew you could see you're worthless." Michael didn't even try to hide his grin. "That should cover bus fare home." Sarah Vanessa, the fiancée, covered her mouth, pretending to cough to hide her laughter. Sarah's face burned with humiliation. She dug her fingernails into her palms, refusing to cry in front of these people. She had walked into this room with hope, and she was leaving with a single dollar bill and the confirmation that even the universe thought she was a joke, as a joke. Attorney Calloway, however, did not laugh. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a crisp $1 whole bill, and slid it across the polished table to Sarah. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something deliberate. As Sarah reached out to take the bill, Calloway also placed a small cream-colored business card on top of it. "Miss Mitchell," he said quietly, his voice cutting through Judith's lingering laughter, "I will need to speak with you privately tomorrow morning. Please meet me at this address at 9 a.m. sharp. It is a matter of utmost importance regarding your inheritance." Judith stopped mid-laugh, her eyes narrowing. "What inheritance? She already got her $1. Calloway did not look at Judith. He kept his eyes locked on Sarah. "Tomorrow, Ms. Mitchell. 9 a.m. Do not be late." Sarah picked up the dollar bill and the business card, her hands trembling. The card was heavy, expensive stock with an address embossed in gold lettering. It wasn't the law office. It was an address in a town called Ravens Hollow, nearly 2 hours north. She had no idea what it meant, but something in Calloway's steady gaze told her this wasn't over. That night, Sarah sat on the lumpy futon in her apartment, staring at the business card under the dim light of a thrift store lamp. Emma was asleep in the bedroom, her soft breathing the only sound in the quiet space. Sarah had fodders from the pawn shop, a single dollar from a dead aunt who apparently thought she was worth exactly that, and an appointment she couldn't afford to drive to. But she thought about the way Calloway had looked at her, the way he had ignored Judith's venom entirely, the deliberate way he had handed her that card. She didn't understand what was happening, but she had survived 2 years of hell. She could survive one more mystery. The next morning, Sarah dropped Emma off at her neighbor, Mrs. Chen's apartment, promising to be back by noon. She filled the Corrales tank with the last of her cash and headed north. The highway gave way to winding 2-lane roads that cut through dense forests of bare November trees. The town of Ravens Hollow wasn't on her phone's GPS. She had to use a gas station map. The paper creased and torn to find the turnoff. The address led her down a narrow private road. The asphalt cracked and overgrown with weeds. She drove for 10 minutes, her anxiety rising, convinced she had made a terrible mistake. Then the trees opened up, and Sarah slammed on the brakes, her mouth falling open in shock. Sitting at the end of the road, perched on a hill overlooking a grey, mist-covered lake, was an estate, not a house. An estate, the main structure, was a sprawling Victorian mansion, 3 stories tall with a slate roof, wraparound porches, and tall windows that caught the morning light. The paint was faded, the gardens overgrown, but the bones of the place were grand, almost regal. Beside the mansion sat a separate carriage house and what looked like a restored barn. Attorney Calloway stood on the front steps, a black umbrella in hand, waiting. Sarah killed the engine and stepped out, her legs weak. "This can't be right," she whispered. Calloway walked down to meet her, a slight smile on his weathered face. "Welcome, Ms. Mitchell," he said, his voice warm. "Welcome to Witmore House, your inheritance." Sarah stared at the sprawling Victorian mansion, her brain refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. "This has to be a mistake," she stammered, taking a step backward. "I got $1. You gave me $1 in front of those people." Calloway nodded, his expression calm. "I did. And that, Miss Mitchell, was precisely what your great-aunt Evelyn instructed me to do. She was very specific. In the presence of the Richardsons, you were to receive exactly $1, nothing more, nothing less." She wanted them to laugh. She wanted them to dismiss you entirely. Sarah's hands were shaking. Why? Why would she humiliate me like that? Because Calloway said gently, stepping aside and gesturing toward the massive front door. Evelyn Witmore knew exactly who Judith Richardson was. She knew that if the Richardsons suspected you had inherited anything of value, they would bury you in litigation before you ever saw a dime. Your ex-husband's family has a legal team that has destroyed people for sport. Evelyn wanted them to walk away, convinced you were worth nothing. She wanted them gone, and it worked. Calloway produced a heavy iron key from his coat pocket and unlocked the front door. The hinges groaned as he pushed it open, releasing a rush of air that smelled of aged wood, dust, and faintly of lavender sachets. He stepped inside, and after a moment of frozen hesitation, Sarah followed. The interior took her breath away. The foyer was enormous, with a grand staircase sweeping upward to the second floor. The floors were hardwood, scuffed but intact. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, draped in cobwebs, but still stunning. To the left was a formal sitting room, filled with furniture covered in white sheets. To the right, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Evelyn lived here alone for 43 years, Calloway explained, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. She was a widow, no children. She made her fortune in textile manufacturing in the 1970s and 80s, then retired counts. She was, by all accounts, a very private woman. She watched you from a distance, Sarah. She knew about Emma's illness. She knew about the divorce. She knew the Richardsons had destroyed you financially, and she wanted to give you a chance to rebuild. Sarah turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "So this house, this estate, it's mine." Calloway hesitated, and in that pause, Sarah felt her stomach drop. "What's the catch?" "There is a condition," Calloway admitted. "Under the terms of the trust, you must live in this house full-time for a minimum of 1 year. You cannot sell it, lease it, or transfer ownership during that time. If you abandon the property, it reverts to the State Historical Society. Additionally, the estate comes with significant financial obligations. There is a property tax bill of $18,000 due in 90 days. The utilities have been shut off for 4 years. The roof needs urgent repairs estimated at $30,000. There is no heat, no running water, and the septic system is failing." Sarah felt the hope draining out of her as quickly as it had appeared. She walked over to one of the sheet-covered chairs and sat down heavily, dust puffing up around her. So she gave me a mansion I can't afford to live in? I don't have a 18, Zand. I don't have a 800. I just pawned my grandmother's locket for 40. How am I supposed to fix a roof? Calloway walked over and sat in the chair across from her, setting his briefcase on the floor. Evelyn anticipated that. He said, "She left you more than just the house." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope, handing it to Sarah. Inside this envelope is a cashier's check for 50 gallows and drawn from Evelyn's estate account. It is designated for immediate repairs and living expenses. It should cover the taxes, the roof, and basic restoration of utilities. Sarah pulled the check out with trembling fingers. $50,000. She had never held a check for that amount in her entire life. But even as relief flooded her, her practical nurse's brain kicked in. That will cover the immediate crisis, but what about after? How do I keep this place running? I don't have a job. I have a 6-year-old daughter. Calloway leaned back, a small smile crossing his face. Evelyn thought of that too. Follow me. He led Sarah through the main floor, past the library, through a butler's pantry, and into the back of the house. He opened a door she assumed led to a basement, but instead, stone steps descended into darkness. Calloway flicked a switch, and a series of old incandescent bulbs flickered to life, illuminating a wide stone staircase. At the bottom was a heavy wooden door with iron braces. Calloway unlocked it with a second key. When the door swung open, Sarah gasped. The room beyond was a climate-controlled wine cellar. But it didn't hold wine. It held art. Paintings lined the stone walls, each one carefully wrapped in protective cloth and mounted on custom racks. In the center of the room were wooden crates, dozens of them stacked neatly and labeled with dates ranging from 1965 to 2003. Calloway walked to the nearest painting and carefully pulled back the protective cloth. Beneath it was a stunning oil painting of a coastal landscape, the brush strokes bold and unmistakable. Sarah didn't know much about art, but even she recognized the signature in the corner. "This is a Rothwell," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "James Rothwell. I saw his work at a hospital charity auction once. A single painting sold for $120,000. Calloway nodded. Evelyn was a collector. She bought directly from artists before they became famous. She had an eye for talent that the market hadn't recognized yet. Over 4 decades, she amassed one of the finest private collections of contemporary American art on the East Coast. There are 57 paintings in this cellar, Ms. Mitchell. Conservative auction estimates place the total value between 8 to 12 million. Sarah's knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of a wooden crate to keep from falling. "That's not possible," she breathed. Why didn't she sell them? Why live alone in a house falling apart if she had millions in art? Because she didn't need the money, Calloway said simply. She lived modestly by choice, and she wanted this collection to go to someone who would appreciate what it meant to build something from nothing, someone who understood struggle, someone like you. He handed Sarah a leather portfolio. Inside are the certificates of authenticity, the original purchase receipts, and a letter from Evelyn. She asks only one thing, that you wait 1 full year before selling anything. Live in the house, restore it. Let Emma grow up here. Give yourself time to breathe. After the year, you may sell the art, keep it, donate it, whatever you choose, but you must stay." Sarah opened the portfolio with shaking hands and pulled out the letter. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned. It began, "Dear Sarah, if you are reading this, you have survived what would have broken most people. I watched you fight for your daughter with a ferocity that reminded me of myself. The Richardsons are vultures, and I will not let them take one more thing from you. This house, this art, this future, it is yours. Build something beautiful, Evelyn." Tears blurred Sarah's vision. She looked around the cellar at the paintings worth more than she could comprehend, and then up at Calloway. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Calloway replied. "Move in. Start over." But there was something in his tone, a hesitation. Sarah wiped her eyes. "What else? What aren't you telling me?" Calloway sighed. "Judith Richardson called my office this morning. She's contesting the will. She claims Evelyn was mentally incompetent when she drafted it. She's hired a litigation firm to freeze the estate. The hearing is in 6 days." Sarah felt the familiar cold dread settle into her chest. The same feeling she had experienced when Michael's lawyers served her divorce papers, while she sat in a hospital room, holding Emma's hand during a chemotherapy infusion. "They're going to take this away from me, aren't they? Just like they took everything else." Calloway shook his head firmly. "Not if we're prepared." Evelyn knew Judith would try this. That's why she spent 2 years building an airtight case. "Come with me." They climbed back up the stone stairs and walked to the library. Calloway pulled back one of the white sheets, covering a massive oak desk. He unlocked the bottom drawer with yet another key and pulled out a fireproof document box. Inside were medical records, cognitive assessments, and notarized statements. Evelyn underwent a full neurological and psychological evaluation every 6 months for the last 3 years of her life, Calloway explained, spreading the documents across the desk. She was examined by 4 independent physicians, including a neurologist from Columbia Presbyterian. Every single report confirms she was of completely sound mind. She also had me videotape the signing of her will. She sat in front of a camera for 90 minutes and explained in explicit detail why she was leaving the estate to you and not to the Richardsons. Sarah picked up one of the psychological evaluations. The doctor's notes were clear and clinical. Patient demonstrates full cognitive function, intact memory, logical reasoning, and clear testamentary intent. Why would she go to such lengths? Because she knew exactly who she was dealing with, Calloway said quietly. Judith Richardson tried this same maneuver when Evelyn's husband died in 1989. She claimed he had promised her a portion of his business assets. She dragged Evelyn through 18 months of litigation. Evelyn won, but it cost her a fortune in legal fees. She swore she would never let Judith win again. The hearing took place in the county probate court on a grey Friday morning. Sarah sat beside Calloway at the petitioner's table, wearing a borrowed black suit from a church clothing drive. Across the aisle, Judith Richardson sat flanked by 3 attorneys in expensive tailored suits. Michael was there too, his arms crossed, watching Sarah with cold detachment. The judge, a stern woman in her early 60s named Judge Winters, reviewed the motion to freeze the estate. "Counsel for the respondent," Judge Winters said, looking over her, reading glasses at Judith's lead attorney. A sharp-featured man named Preston Cole You are claiming the dissident lacked testamentary capacity. Present your evidence. Preston Cole stood smoothing his silk tie. Your Honor, Evelyn Witmore was 81 years old at the time of her death. She lived alone in a deteriorating mansion with no regular contact with family or medical professionals. She left her entire estate, valued at over $12 million, to a woman she had not seen in person in over 20 years. This is clearly the act of a confused, isolated, elderly woman who was manipulated. He turned, pointing directly at Sarah. Ms. Mitchell had motive opportunity and a documented history of financial desperation. We believe she exerted undue influence over a vulnerable woman. Sarah's face burned. She hadn't even known Evelyn was alive until the letter arrived. Calloway rose slowly, his voice calm and measured. Your Honor, may I present evidence to the contrary? He handed the clerk a thick binder. These are comprehensive medical and psychological evaluations conducted by 4 independent physicians over a 3-year period. All confirm Miss Witmore's full mental competency. Additionally, I have a notarized video recording of the will signing in which Ms. Witmore explicitly explains her reasoning. I request the court view the recording. Judge Winters reviewed the medical reports, her expression unreadable. She nodded. Bailiff set up the screen. The lights dimmed. The video began. Evelyn Witmore appeared on the screen, sitting in a high-backed chair in the very library Sarah had just stood in. She was small, white-haired, but her eyes were sharp and clear. She looked directly into the camera. "My name is Evelyn Margaret Witmore," she began, her voice strong. "I am 81 years old, of sound mind and body, and I am recording this to ensure there is no ambiguity regarding my final wishes. I am leaving my estate to Sarah Mitchell, because she has demonstrated the qualities I value most: resilience, selflessness, and grace under unimaginable pressure." Evelyn leaned forward slightly. "I am not leaving anything of value to Judith Richardson or her family, because they are, to put it plainly, parasites. Judith tried to steal from me once before when my husband died. She failed. I know she will try again when I am gone. So let me be clear. Sarah Mitchell never asked me for anything. She does not even know I am doing this. I am choosing her because I have watched her fight for her daughter's life while her husband abandoned her and his family destroyed her. That is character. That is worth. The Richardsons have neither." The courtroom was dead silent. On the screen, Evelyn signed the will, her hand steady and deliberate. The video ended. Judge Winters removed her glasses, staring at Judith's legal team. "Mr. Cole, do you have any evidence beyond speculation to suggest undue influence?" Preston Cole opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked back at Judith, who was staring at the blank screen, her face pale. "No, Your Honor," he finally said. The judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack. Motion denied. "The will stands as executed. This estate is the legal property of Sarah Mitchell. Case dismissed." Sarah exhaled, tears streaming down her face. Calloway placed a steady hand on her shoulder. Judith stood abruptly, grabbing her purse. As she passed Sarah's table, she leaned down, her voice a venomous hiss. "You think you've won. You'll lose that house within a year. You're nobody, Sarah." Michael didn't even look at her. He just walked out. But Sarah didn't feel small anymore. She looked Judith directly in the eye. "I survived you once. I can do it again. And this time, I have a home. 6 years later, Witmore House stood restored, its white paint gleaming, its gardens meticulously maintained. The estate operated as a private foundation supporting childhood cancer research, funded by the careful, strategic sale of Evelyn's art collection. Sarah had sold 12 pieces at auction, generating $4.7 million. The rest she donated to the Witmore Museum of Contemporary Art, housed in the restored carriage house. She had returned to nursing, working part-time at a rural clinic, but her real work was the foundation. Emma, now 12 and healthy, ran through the halls of the mansion, her laughter echoing off the high ceilings. She had her own art studio in the attic, painting landscapes of the lake. Judith Richardson's legal fees from the failed probate case had bankrupted her attempt to buy a vacation home. In the Bahamas, Michael had remarried and divorced again within 3 years. Sarah never spoke to either of them again. She didn't need to. On the mantel in the library, Sarah kept 2 things: the framed $1 bill from the will reading and Evelyn's letter. Some nights when the doubts crept in, she would read the letter again, build something beautiful, and she had. Because the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's the belief that you are worth more than the people who tried to destroy you said you were. Sometimes that belief comes from a stranger who saw your worth when your own family could not. And sometimes that single dollar is the first step toward reclaiming everything they said you'd never deserve.